Were your friends and family, were they surprised to see you garner this kind of notoriety and fame?
With some of the friends and contacts I had, acquaintances, I think I had some responses that were a bit hurtful because the media that was interested in having me on to give interviews through these years were primarily conservative media. And I had some people in my life who I cared about who are left-wing and were disappointed in me that they felt that they didn't know that they branded me as right-wing and that they felt that they needed to distance themselves from me as a result. That was hurtful. I had other professional contacts who were center-left, who aren't radical people, but nonetheless felt like being associated with somebody like me who's now going on Fox News and Tucker Carlson and things like that was, it made them uncomfortable. So they distanced themselves from me professional. At that time, and when I think about it, sometimes it's still hurtful, but you know, the truth can hurt. So none of this path is easy. And if it was, you know, the fight for justice is seldom ever met without challenges. So I just had to learn to accept that and build better resilience in myself. I'm still learning a lot of things. As you mentioned earlier, you noticed that my disposition is that I'm rather, I guess, like maybe timid or soft and quiet. And that's genuinely how I am. If one Googles me or reads my Wikipedia, you get this impression that I'm this far-right agitator who's out there to incite violence and things like that. And when I read that stuff, it is a bit shocking to me because very few people in the world who have heard of me get the opportunity to sit in front of me and meet me. So their impression of me is this type of things, that I'm a dangerous person or things like that. And that does make me sad because there are lots of people on the left who are really decent people who are also interested in justice. Maybe they disagree with me on a number of policy issues, or they disagree with my interpretation of what's causing some of the extremism and violence. But because they come with a judgment of me that they've been informed through Wikipedia or Google or some of these biased articles and lies, they don't want to associate with me.
I know that feeling. I think many of us do. And it's a funny sort of world we've all created as creators, whether it be Twitter or X or on YouTube, and we all sort of know each other. So I do these interviews, for those who don't know, in batches, and the 7 people in a couple of days, and I say, oh yeah, well, I'm about to have Andy No on, and they will say, oh, what a lovely guy, like they know you, and everyone seems to know each other. And I suppose that community is quite a nice thing. One of the things I learned from reading your brilliant book, Unmasked, is that there's a lot more to it than we realize with regards to not just Antifa, I suppose, but this is left-wing activism and the way that I don't know, it just looks like it happens. A bus gets put on fire, things get flipped over, windows get smashed. That was happening a lot in the Leeds riots just now. But in your book, you write about how the window smashing is part of a whole sort of manifesto and a guidebook.
Yes, so for Antifa and the violent far left, the act of vandalism is actually very core to their incitement of violence tactics. It's on the surface, you would look at it as, it's easier to dismiss when you think it's just a window being broken or it's just debris that's being put in the middle of the street. These type of things, a crowd, particularly at night, one that's already been agitated towards violence, will respond differently to seeing windows being broken than if you and I were walking out on the high street and we happen to witness some act of violence like that randomly. And the introduction of fire as well. So in the 2020 riots, what made it so particularly effective for Antifa is because they had an environment where they were able to infiltrate and to agitate. The numbers of violent communist anarchists, that's the ideology of Antifa, is relatively small. I mean, even in the epicenter of a city like Portland, which is the city that has most of them who are sympathetic to that part of it or organized around it, they can get maybe 1,000 people And it's a lot, but when you're in a crowd of 15,000 people and you're only 500, 600 of them, you need more numbers than 500 or 600 to do the type of violence that we saw, and to do it every night, as they did. So what happens is they embedded themselves in these larger BLM protests, which press described as mostly peaceful. And it's true in the sense that a lot of people who came were regular Democrats, regular liberal people who were outraged at what they had seen over and over on television in regards to George Floyd and what they've been told about systemic racism in America that is killing Black and brown people. And this is a propaganda from BLM building up for years. A lot of people showed up because they were angry over that, not because they actually wanted to loot or to cause violence. But when you have that type of setting and context and the opportunity, and you only really need a small number of people to light the match. And so in 2020, that would be often, it's the breaking of the windows. When the windows of the commercial businesses is broken in, then you also have those who see the opportunity to loot. And that's what happened over and over. Shopping centers, stores were completely looted. I'm just going to remind people of the footage that we saw from city to city, whether it be like a Walmart or a Target. These are very big businesses. These doors would be smashed open, and then you'd see hundreds of people come in and steal HD TVs and all this other things. And the response from the radical left was that they, in terms of the intelligentsia and things they were writing in commentary and the books that were coming out justifying these acts of violence, they said that that looting was a justified response to systemic racism and the racism of capitalism. And these type of radical ideas over the last number of years have really begun to enter the mainstream left. That's the, I would say the core thesis of all of my journalism for 6 years now, is that there has been a mainstreaming of extremism on the left. And I mean, historically, the Democrats is a center-left party. The establishment of it still is. I mean, they're very close with very big donors on Wall Street, etc. They're the party of many of the corporate donors and celebrities and stuff. And these aren't necessarily people who would want a revolution. However, slowly, some of these ideas from the extreme left, hatred of America, beliefs and lies about abolishing the police, that's a necessity to save Black and brown people, it has entered into a bit more of the mainstream on the left. So you have politicians at the local level in cities like Seattle, Portland, Berkeley. A lot of it is concentrated on the West Coast, and we can talk about why I believe that happens, but where they just turn a blind eye to this violence on the side because they believe it's justified in some type of way. And that type of escalation in the rhetoric and the extremism leads to environment where the norm now in my home state here, Portland, is that there is no free speech. And when I say that, it sounds like I'm being hyperbolic. I'm not. So the First Amendment hasn't changed in any way. It still applies in all of the United States. Portland is included. What's happened in terms of how free speech no longer applies is actually very brilliant in terms of what the radical violent left did. They created this environment where if you speak out in any type of contrarian way, whether you challenge woke, you challenge the trans ideology, you express support for Donald Trump, and you organize in public, you will be subjected to violence, and the police have been demoralized and defunded in such a way that they're not able to even respond to emergency phone calls for help. And, you know, I know a lot of people dislike Trump supporters for a number of reasons, but then it doesn't just stop there. For example, Kelly J. Keane, who I know has been a guest on your show. She's a British women's rights campaigner. She had an American tour 2 years ago in Portland. And when that was announced, the Antifa militants in Portland started a campaign to fundraise to buy melee weapons and bladed weapons. And when you have that type of environment where you're potentially killed for speaking out at a public rally and engaging in First Amendment rights, you're not going to do it. Or if you do it, you're going to subject yourself and your attendees to potentially being killed. And that's actually happened in Portland. You know, I'm speaking to you days after the attempted assassination attempt of Donald Trump in Pennsylvania. He narrowly survived that, but one of his supporters didn't, who was seated near him, was shot dead. That wasn't the first act of deadly violence against somebody who was participating in a pro-Trump type of event. In August of 2020, at the height of the nightly BLM Antifa riots in Portland, there were groups of Antifa and far-left extremists who were marauding through downtown, literally looking for Trump supporters. And one of them, an armed gunman, found one and shot him dead, and he fled out of state. He was killed in a shootout with police 5 days later. And he's been held up as a martyr by Antifa. I mean, Vice even did a interview with him when he was on the run.
Yeah.
You know, and portrayed him as sort of like this heroic type figure who's in this interview, if you watch it, the name of the gunman is Michael Rhino, and he's doing an on-camera interview while he's wanted by federal authorities for a murder. He said that he shot and killed this person to protect black people. And it's like, yeah, you know, and he's literally been treated as a martyr. There has been banners created for him and artwork eulogizing what they view as his sacrifice, and Antifa encouraged this type of violence. And what's been disturbing, although not surprising to me, is seeing the number of left-wing people who aren't necessarily violent far left expressing disappointment that the gunman didn't succeed against Trump.
This comes from this kind of punch a Nazi narrative. And I suppose there's that philosophical debate about whether, if you could, would you go back and kill baby Hitler or I think adolescent Hitler it could be. I don't know if it has to be a baby. And if that would have been a good thing. Obviously, forgetting the ramifications, the butterfly effect, that we wouldn't exist anymore, or there could have been an even worse person who came up. Would it have been morally okay to do that? Would it be morally okay to go back and kill Hitler?
You're asking me?
Yeah.
That's I mean, I always find that like theoretical question quite, it's like, you know, the first impulse is like, well, based on everything we know, well, yes, of course. But then there's a lot we don't know about how, if it wasn't Hitler, maybe it would have been somebody else who was like him, or maybe even worse.
Sure.
Or maybe somebody who could have for what won for the Nazis in the Second World War. So we don't, you know, it's
sure. Forgetting that though, there was this great Stephen Fry book where he does imagine that that's happened. Someone goes back in time and then suddenly wakes up and Hitler wasn't there, and he sort of wakes up now, but everything's different because. And he's like, "Oh, did it work? Did it work?" And like, "Yeah, you're just, you're good. You're in America." And it turned, you know, America's weird, and it's like worse than it would have been, because Hitler's friend got in charge instead, who was even worse. But just in a moral part, like, forget the after bit. Would it be acceptable to go and kill Hitler? The reason I ask is I feel like the issue here is that Godwin's law, which is bringing up Hitler when, you know, the inevitability that Hitler will be brought up into any conversation. He is brought up all the time and is equated to Trump. Even J.D. Vance said America's Hitler about Trump, which I think was a mistake, obviously, to say. And I don't think you might not like Trump, I don't think Trump's done anything vaguely anywhere near anything Hitler did. So I'm just wondering if that's part of the problem. I think people think, well, it's probably acceptable to go and kill Hitler if he were there, or to punch Hitler, and Trump's like Hitler, and so I should be able to punch them, well, his supporters.
You brought up the punch a Nazi meme. That was sparked after, I think it was in 2017 or 2016, when there was an alt-right figure in America named Richard Spencer who was giving some type of interview, and then there was an Antifa person who ran up and assaulted him. You know, it was caught on camera and video, and it became a meme. It was viral, and it was celebrated not just by Antifa, but many self-described liberals and those on the mainstream left. And when I was seeing the responses to that, I was how I was seeing is that this is laying sort of a dangerous path for America to go in, because it's where people are knowingly or not moving in a path where they believe that people who express, at the end of the day, different political opinions from them, opinions that they may abhor and hate, that because somebody holds those views that they should be subjected to violence. And well, that did become sort of normalized in mainstream. It wasn't just Richard Spencer who was subjected to that type of violence. There were leading up to the November election in 2016, when there were Trump rallies in a number of cities, the people who were going to these rallies were being assaulted and attacked as well. This happened in San Jose. It happened in Chicago, where political opponents felt emboldened to go out on the street and to assault people as they were leaving these rallies, or as they were coming in, attacking them, smashing up their cars, hitting them in the face. And all those type of actions were celebrated, and nobody that I recall, Democrats, spoke out and condemned it. And I mean, that these type of acts are really dangerous attacks on democracy, because if people cannot engage in things like listening to politicians safely, if they're potentially subjected to violence and or killed for it, then you don't have a democratic society anymore. And my concern is that in there's the Democrats' zealous hatred of Trump, that and what they view as needing to protect democracy, they've actually done the opposite. They created this paradox of they are fomenting the conditions for the exact opposite to happen.
It's so complicated, because I suppose if he were actually like Hitler, which I think we can agree he certainly isn't, but in their minds he is. And I suppose that is a point where you go, okay, we've got democracy and that's important, but maybe there's a limit. Maybe there's a point at which we go, gosh, this guy is rounding up the Jews and putting them on a train somewhere. We've got to take him out. Obviously, they've got this derangement syndrome where they think that we are at that level.
Yeah, and that's the fault of the media, I think, who have misinformed them, who have done interviews with activists who have put this poison out in the public for years now, that Trump is following the steps of Hitler, and that any type of action to stop him by any means necessary is needed. These are, first of all, comparing Trump's political ideology to that of Nazi Germany and Hitler. The people who are claiming that are lying. Like, they don't understand the political ideologies that was happening leading up to the Second World War, and comparing the two. One, it's offensive, but two, it's also a lie. They're not called out enough for it. I saw that the New Republic, which is a left-wing magazine, publication, and news site, stuck by their decision to as the front cover of their magazine in just a few weeks ago in June, a few weeks before the attempted assassination, had a picture of Trump and this cliche of him, sort of his image was being morphed into Hitler's face with the mustache and everything. I mean, that is stochastic terrorism. The left like to use that term a lot. Stochastic terrorism is where you put into the ether, like you demonize a group of people or an individual so much that somebody someday will take some type of action against them. I mean, this is exactly what they're doing, and they accuse people like me of doing that.